The cruelest kind of betrayal is walking away from someone who still believes you're the safest place in the world. Those were the words Vivian Brooks would remember for the rest of her life, though she would not hear them until much later. On a cold Thursday evening in downtown Chicago, rain streaked across the tall hospital windows, while monitors hummed softly inside the cardiac intensive care unit. Vivian lay motionless beneath crisp white sheets, an oxygen tube resting beneath her nose, her skin noticeably pale against the pillow. At 35, she looked years older than she had only 6 months before. Her heart condition had stolen her energy one slow day at a time, replacing her bright smile with quiet exhaustion. The doctors had stabilized her after another frightening episode that afternoon, but no one could promise what came next. Outside her room, Ryan Calloway adjusted the cuff of his navy suit and glanced at the expensive watch on his wrist. His phone buzzed. Claire Sutton's name lit up the screen. "Are you still coming?" the message read. "Everyone's waiting." Ryan exhaled slowly before slipping the phone back into his pocket. He looked through the small glass window into Vivian's room. She was awake now, barely. Her eyes found his, and despite everything, she managed the faintest smile. She still believed seeing him meant she was not alone. He stepped inside, careful not to make too much noise. Vivian's voice came out barely above a whisper. "You came." Ryan forced a polite smile that never reached his eyes. For a minute, she searched his face, hoping to find the man she had married 12 years earlier. The man who once stayed up all night helping her build business plans around their tiny kitchen table. The man who promised they would face every storm together. Instead, all she saw was someone already halfway out the door. "The doctor said I might need another procedure," she whispered. "I'm scared, Ryan." He looked away toward the rain sliding down the window. "Vivian, I can't keep doing this." Her forehead tightened with confusion. Doing what? Living in hospitals. Living with uncertainty. Waiting for the next emergency. She blinked several times, struggling to understand where the conversation was going. "We'll get through it," she said softly. "We always do." Ryan shook his head. "No, you always believed that. I stopped believing a long time ago." The room became painfully quiet except for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Vivian stared at him as though the words belonged to someone else. "What are you saying?" He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a neatly folded envelope on the bedside table. "I've filed for divorce." The sentence landed with far more force than either of them raised their voices. Vivian didn't reach for the envelope. She simply looked at it, then back at him. "Now," she asked. "While I'm here." Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her eyes. "It's better this way. We both deserve different lives." A tear slowly escaped the corner of Vivian's eye, but she didn't wipe it away. "Different?" she whispered. "Or easier?" Ryan said nothing. His silence answered the question better than words ever could. His phone vibrated again. "Claire." He glanced at the screen for less than a second before slipping the phone into his pocket. Vivian noticed. Of course she noticed. "Is she waiting?" Ryan closed his eyes for a brief moment before nodding once. "Yes." Vivian let out a slow breath that sounded almost like a laugh, except there was no happiness left inside it. "Then don't keep her waiting." Ryan hesitated only long enough to pick up his coat from the chair. "I hope someday you'll understand." Vivian looked toward the ceiling instead of at him. "No," she said quietly. "I hope someday you do." He turned, opened the door, and walked down the hallway without looking back. The soft click of the door echoed through the room louder than any slammed door ever could. Vivian remained perfectly still, listening as his footsteps disappeared into the distance. She had no idea that this would be the last time she would ever watch her husband leave as an ordinary man. And Ryan had no idea that the woman he had just abandoned was the only reason the empire carrying his name had ever existed in the first place. Some people do not lose everything the day they make the wrong choice. They lose it the day they become too proud to notice the warning signs. Ryan Calloway walked into the penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan feeling lighter than he had in months. Claire had already opened a bottle of champagne. Soft jazz drifted through the living room, and the city lights shimmered across the floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything around him looked like the future he had convinced himself he deserved. Claire smiled as she handed him a glass. "So, is it finally over?" Ryan took a sip before answering. "It is." She signed. Ryan shrugged. She does not have much of a choice anymore. Claire stepped closer and wrapped an arm around his waist. Then this is our beginning. Ryan nodded, but his attention was already drifting toward tomorrow's executive meeting. His mind was filled with expansion plans, investor presentations, and the image of himself standing alone at the top of Callaway Dynamics. He believed he had finally removed the one thing slowing him down. The next morning, sunlight poured through the glass walls of the company's headquarters in downtown Chicago. Employees greeted Ryan with polite smiles as he crossed the marble lobby. The building carried his last name on every directory and conference screen. Over the years, he had begun believing that meant it truly belonged to him. Inside the executive boardroom, Ryan stood confidently before a wall-sized presentation. "This company has spent too many years protecting old traditions," he announced. "That changes today." Several executives exchanged uncertain looks. Ryan continued anyway. "We are restructuring leadership, reducing unnecessary oversight, and preparing for aggressive expansion before the end of the fiscal year." Claire sat quietly near the back of the room, watching him with unmistakable admiration. Every confident sentence only convinced her more that she had chosen the winning side. After the meeting ended, Chief Financial Officer Daniel Mercer caught up with Ryan outside the conference room. "Do you have a minute?" Daniel asked carefully. Ryan checked his watch. "Make it quick." Daniel lowered his voice. "Legal sent over another request this morning." Ryan sighed. "About what?" "The founder trust documentation." Ryan frowned. "Again?" Daniel nodded. "They want updated authorization before several ownership transfers can move forward." Ryan waved a dismissive hand. "Tell legal to stop wasting my time. I have signed every document they have ever needed." Daniel hesitated. "It is not your signature they are asking for." Ryan looked irritated. "Then whose?" Daniel glanced around the hallway before answering. "The trust holder." Ryan laughed under his breath. "Daniel, I am the Chief Executive Officer." "I know." "Then handle it." Daniel watched him walk away without another word. Something about the conversation left him uneasy, but Ryan had never been interested in details that did not reinforce his confidence. Late that afternoon, Ryan stopped by Claire's office. She closed the door behind him and smiled. "I have been looking at the numbers." "What numbers?" "If we sell part of the company next year, we could make enough to buy a place in Aspen, another one in Miami, maybe even spend summers in Italy." Ryan grinned. "You are already spending my money?" Claire laughed. "Our future." Ryan slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Everything here is under control." Neither of them noticed the unopened envelope sitting on his assistant's desk marked Urgent Review from Legal Affairs. Inside was a formal notice requesting the immediate participation of the Brooks Family Trust. It was the third request sent in less than 2 weeks. Upstairs, no one realized those letters had been quietly copied to another office across the city. And in a private hospital room where the machines no longer sounded quite as frightening, Vivian Brooks opened a folder that had remained sealed for nearly 8 years. She looked at the first page, then slowly lifted her eyes toward Marcus Ellison. "I think it is finally time," she said. Marcus gave a single calm nod. "I was hoping you would say that. The strongest people are not the ones who never get broken. They are the ones who quietly remember who they were before someone convinced them they were nothing." The hospital room was unusually peaceful that afternoon. The storm had passed, leaving pale sunlight stretching across the hardwood floor. Vivian Brooks sat upright for the first time in days, a blanket draped over her shoulders and a cup of untouched tea cooling beside her. Her body was still weak, but there was something different in her eyes. The fear Ryan had expected to leave behind had slowly been replaced by clarity. Marcus Ellison placed a thick leather folder on the small table beside her bed. He did not rush her. He had represented the Brooks family for almost 15 years and understood that some decisions could not be forced. Vivian rested her fingertips on the folder without opening it. "I promised myself I would never need this," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "I remember." She smiled faintly. "My father always said that if I ever opened this file, it meant I had stopped protecting someone who no longer wanted protecting." The words lingered between them. After a long silence, Marcus asked, "Do you regret protecting Ryan?" Vivian looked toward the window where people crossed the street carrying coffee cups and umbrellas, living ordinary lives that suddenly felt very far away. "No," she answered honestly. "I regret believing that love could replace humility." Marcus did not argue. He had watched the marriage unfold from a distance. He had also watched Vivian repeatedly ask him to keep certain documents sealed. Years earlier, when Ryan's software company had been drowning in debt, every bank had refused another loan. Investors had disappeared one after another. Payroll had almost been missed twice. Ryan believed he had saved the company through determination and endless work. He never knew what happened behind the scenes. Vivian had quietly authorized money from the Brooks family trust through a series of private investment vehicles that carried no family name. The emergency funding had kept the company alive. She had personally negotiated with early investors who only agreed to stay because they trusted her judgment. Even the original patents that became the foundation of Callaway Dynamics had been purchased through a holding company Marcus created at Vivian's request. Ryan never questioned where the opportunities came from. Success arrived, and he accepted it as proof of his own brilliance. "You could have told him," Marcus said softly. Vivian shook her head. "I wanted him to build confidence, not dependence. I wanted him to believe people respected him because of who he was." She paused before adding with quiet sadness, "Somewhere along the way, he stopped respecting everyone else." Marcus slowly opened the folder. Inside were ownership records, trust agreements, original incorporation papers, and handwritten notes from nearly a decade earlier. Vivian recognized every signature, every sacrifice, every compromise she had made to protect both the company and the man she loved. Tears gathered in her eyes. But this time, they were not tears of heartbreak. They were tears for the version of herself who had spent years standing in the shadows because she believed someone else's dream mattered more than her own. Marcus slid one document toward her. "This is the activation authorization. Once you sign it, the trustees regain full authority to exercise the ownership rights that have remained dormant." Vivian read every line carefully. For the first time in years, she did not think about what Ryan wanted. She thought about what was fair. She picked up the pen, then stopped. "Does this ruin him?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "No. His own decisions will do that. This simply restores the truth." Vivian closed her eyes for a brief moment before signing her name with a steady hand. The ink had barely dried when Marcus's phone vibrated. He glanced at the message and allowed himself the smallest smile. "It has already begun," he said. Across downtown Chicago, a notification quietly appeared in the inboxes of every voting member on the board of directors. Ryan was still convinced he was preparing the company for its biggest chapter. He had no idea that, for the first time in 8 years, the true owner had finally decided to step back into the story. The truth rarely arrives with shouting. Most of the time, it slips quietly into the room while the loudest person is still busy celebrating. 3 days later, Ryan stood at the front of another executive meeting wearing the same confident smile that had become part of his public image. A massive digital screen displayed the words Vision 2035 across the conference room. Investors from New York and San Francisco joined by video, while department heads filled every leather chair around the polished walnut table. Ryan tapped the remote and smiled. "This company has never been in a stronger position. By this time next year, we will complete 2 major acquisitions and expand into 3 international markets." Several board members nodded politely. Claire sat beside him, dressed in a tailored ivory suit, occasionally glancing at him with unmistakable pride. She could already picture magazine covers featuring the two of them as Chicago's newest corporate power couple. Then the conference room door opened. Daniel Mercer stepped inside carrying a tablet, his expression unusually tense. "Ryan, legal is asking for 5 minutes before we move to the shareholder vote." Ryan frowned. "It can wait." Daniel remained where he was. "They said it cannot." The room grew noticeably quieter. Ryan sighed dramatically before placing the presentation remote on the table. "Fine. 5 minutes." A woman from the legal department connected her laptop to the screen. Instead of financial charts, a formal notice appeared. "Authorization review pending. Brooks Family Trust." Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Why are we discussing a trust that has nothing to do with this meeting?" The attorney answered carefully. "Because several ownership actions cannot legally move forward without authorization from the controlling trust." Ryan gave a short laugh. "Then whoever manages that trust can sign whatever they need. We have deadlines." The attorney hesitated. "It is not that simple." Ryan folded his arms. "Explain." She clicked to the next page. A corporate ownership diagram filled the screen. Multiple holding companies connected to one final entity that every person in the room silently followed with their eyes. Brooks Family Trust. Ryan's confidence barely moved. This structure has existed for years. Yes, the attorney replied. However, the trust has now been reactivated. Claire looked confused. What does that even mean? Before anyone answered, Ryan's assistant hurried into the room and whispered something into Daniel's ear. Daniel's face immediately changed. He looked at Ryan. She is here. Ryan frowned. Who? Vivian. The room became perfectly still. Ryan almost laughed. She is still in recovery. Daniel swallowed. Apparently, not anymore. Ryan stood up, so quickly his chair rolled backward several feet. That is impossible. Through the conference room's glass wall, several executives turned toward the elevator lobby. Vivian Brooks stepped out wearing a charcoal gray suit instead of a hospital gown. She walked more slowly than she once had, but every step was steady. Her illness had not disappeared, yet neither had her dignity. Marcus Ellison walked beside her carrying a single leather portfolio. Employees who had barely noticed Vivian during past years quietly stood as she passed. Some recognized her immediately. Others simply sensed that something important was unfolding. Claire watched through the glass with growing uneasiness. Why is everyone looking at her like that? Ryan forced a smile that sounded more defensive than confident. Because they feel sorry for her. Marcus stopped outside the conference room doors and looked at Vivian. Are you ready? Vivian took one calm breath. She was not there to embarrass Ryan. She was not there for revenge fueled by anger. She was there because hiding the truth had nearly cost her everything, including herself. She gave Marcus a small nod. He opened the door. Every conversation inside the room stopped. Ryan stared at the woman he had left behind only days earlier. She looked tired but unshaken. She met his eyes without anger and without fear. Then Marcus placed the leather portfolio on the conference table and spoke with quiet confidence. Before this board conducts another vote, there is one matter of ownership that must finally be corrected. Power does not disappear in a single moment. It slips away one signature, one fact, and one truth at a time until the person who thought they controlled everything realizes they never truly did. No one moved after Marcus finished speaking. The conference room was so quiet that the faint hum of the projector suddenly sounded loud. Ryan forced out a laugh. You cannot be serious. Marcus calmly unlatched the leather portfolio and placed several original documents on the polished table. These are certified copies from the original incorporation filings, the Brooks Family Trust, and the controlling shareholder agreement. Ryan barely glanced at them before pushing the papers away with 2 fingers. Legal paperwork does not change who built this company. Vivian finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but every word landed with quiet confidence. No, it only proves who protected it. Ryan turned toward her. Protected it? I worked 18-hour days. I lived in that office. Vivian nodded gently. You did. I never denied that. She looked around the room at the board members who had watched the company grow for years. But when every lender refused to finance us, someone stepped in. When payroll was 2 days away from failing, someone covered it. When our first patent was about to be sold to a competitor, someone bought it first. Ryan folded his arms. And you expect everyone to believe that was you? Marcus answered before Vivian could. Not believe. Verify. He slid another folder toward each board member. Inside were bank records, trust authorizations, acquisition contracts, and signatures dating back almost a decade. Daniel Mercer slowly flipped through the pages. His eyes widened with every document. These account numbers. I have seen them before. Marcus nodded. You have. They funded the company's survival during its first 3 years. Claire leaned toward Ryan and whispered, Why have I never heard any of this? Ryan did not answer because he no longer knew the answer himself. One of the oldest board members, Eleanor Hayes, quietly removed her reading glasses before speaking. I remember these transactions. She looked directly at Vivian. You asked us to keep your involvement confidential because you wanted the management team judged on performance rather than family wealth. Vivian smiled politely. That was my hope. Eleanor sighed. We honored your request. Ryan stared at the older woman in disbelief. You knew? She met his eyes without hesitation. Several of us did. And nobody told me? Because Mrs. Brooks specifically instructed us not to. She believed your confidence mattered more than her recognition. Ryan slowly sat back down. His heartbeat felt louder than the conversations beginning to ripple around the room. Memories he had never questioned suddenly returned one after another. Investors who unexpectedly changed their minds. A critical patent that had somehow become affordable. A financial crisis that mysteriously disappeared almost overnight. Every miracle he had proudly claimed as proof of his leadership suddenly looked very different. Claire's confident smile had vanished completely. She looked from Ryan to Vivian, then back again. "Ryan," she whispered. "Did you know any of this?" He shook his head almost imperceptibly. "No." Vivian reached into her briefcase and carefully placed a faded spiral notebook on the conference table. Ryan recognized it instantly. The blue cover was worn along the edges. Years ago, they had filled that notebook together in the tiny apartment where they dreamed about building a company from nothing. He remembered writing goals inside it late at night. He remembered Vivian sitting beside him with coffee long after midnight. "Open it," she said. Ryan hesitated before slowly turning the first page. Every business model, every financial projection, every early product concept, they were all written in Vivian's handwriting. His own notes appeared only in the margins. He turned another page, then another. His expression changed with each one. The room remained silent as the truth settled over everyone present. Vivian looked at him with sadness instead of satisfaction. "You thought I was standing behind you because I had nothing to offer," she said quietly. "The truth is, I stepped behind you because I believed we were building something together." No one spoke. Then Marcus calmly closed the final folder and looked toward the chairman of the board. Based on the trust activation and controlling ownership provisions, the board must now address one final matter before any other business can continue. Ryan looked up, suddenly realizing that proving who owned the company had only been the beginning. The moment a lie meets the truth, it does not matter how long the lie has been believed. It still falls apart. Ryan looked around the boardroom as though someone would stand up and tell him this was all a misunderstanding. No one did. The chairman of the board, Harold Benson, folded his hands together and spoke with the measured voice of a man who had spent 40 years making difficult decisions. "Before we continue with today's agenda, we have a legal obligation to recognize the controlling shareholder." Ryan immediately stood. "I have been leading this company for 8 years. This meeting is already under my authority." Harold did not raise his voice. Operational authority and ownership are not the same thing. Ryan looked toward the company's general counsel. "Tell him." The attorney adjusted her glasses and opened the thick binder in front of her. According to the corporate charter and the reactivated Brooks Family Trust, Mrs. Vivian Brooks controls the majority voting rights through founder shares that have never been transferred or dissolved. Ryan stared at her. "Founder shares," Marcus answered calmly. "The class of shares that cannot be diluted, cannot be overridden by executive appointment, and carry final voting authority." Claire leaned closer to Ryan, her voice barely audible. "What does that mean?" He swallowed hard before answering. "It means..." He stopped because saying the words out loud would make them real. Marcus finished the sentence for him. "It means Mrs. Brooks has the legal authority to approve or reject every major corporate decision from this day forward." A murmur spread across the room. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. Others quietly looked toward Vivian, waiting to see what she would do. Ryan turned to her, frustration beginning to replace disbelief. "Why now?" he asked. "Why wait until today?" Vivian looked at him for several long seconds. "Because until a week ago, I still believed we were partners." The room fell silent again. "I spent years protecting your reputation because I thought protecting you protected us," she continued. "Even when my health declined, I never questioned whether we were building the same future." She lowered her eyes briefly before looking back at him. "Then you left me alone in a hospital bed and decided my life no longer fit into yours." Ryan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. There was no argument that could erase that memory. Harold cleared his throat. "The board has received a formal request from the controlling shareholder." Marcus handed a sealed envelope across the table. Harold opened it carefully and read the single page inside. His expression remained professional, but even he paused before speaking. "Mrs. Brooks is requesting an immediate vote regarding the position of Chief Executive Officer." Claire's face lost all color. "Ryan," she whispered. Ryan looked around the room, searching for familiar faces, for loyal allies, for anyone willing to stop what was happening. Daniel Mercer avoided his eyes. Eleanor Hayes quietly folded her hands. One by one, the directors looked toward Vivian instead, not because they feared her, but because the documents had reminded them who had quietly carried the company through its darkest years. Vivian noticed Ryan's expression and spoke before the vote could begin. "This is not revenge." Ryan laughed bitterly. "Really?" She nodded. "If I wanted revenge, I would have acted years ago. I am here because leadership without character eventually destroys everything people worked to build." Those words lingered over the conference table. No one challenged them. Harold finally looked around the room. "All those in favor of opening a formal vote on the chief executive officer position, please raise your hands." For one long second, nobody moved. Then Eleanor slowly lifted her hand. Daniel followed. Another director raised his. Then another. Around the table, hands continued rising until Ryan realized the outcome before the count was even finished. Claire looked at him with frightened eyes, but he could not look back. For the first time in his career, the room that had always echoed with his confidence no longer belonged to him. And outside the boardroom, word had already begun spreading through the building that the company's true owner had finally returned. The hardest fall is not losing a title. It is watching people stop believing the story you spent years telling about yourself. The vote was over in less than 3 minutes, but to Ryan Calloway it felt like an entire lifetime collapsing one quiet decision at a time. Harold Benson folded the voting cards and looked across the room with unmistakable gravity. The motion passes. No applause followed. No celebration. Only silence. Harold continued. Effective immediately, Ryan Calloway is relieved of his duties as Chief Executive Officer pending a formal leadership transition. Ryan remained standing, his hands pressed against the conference table. "You cannot do this." Harold met his eyes. "The board just did." Ryan looked toward the directors one last time, hoping someone would object. Nobody spoke. Daniel Mercer finally broke the silence. "Ryan, I am sorry." Ryan laughed bitterly. "No, you are not." He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair and walked toward the door without another word. Claire hurried after him, struggling to keep pace as he crossed the executive floor. Employees quietly stepped aside. Some looked down at their desks. Others watched from behind computer screens. The whispers had already started. Ryan could hear fragments as he passed. "She was the founder. Did you know? I had no idea. Everything was under her trust." The elevator ride to the lobby felt longer than it ever had before. Claire reached for his arm. "Ryan, talk to me." He pulled away. "Not now." Outside the building, reporters had already begun gathering after receiving anonymous tips that an emergency board meeting had ended unexpectedly. Camera flashes reflected off the glass entrance as Ryan exited through the revolving doors. A reporter called out, "Mr. Calloway, is it true that ownership of the company belongs to Vivian Brooks?" Another shouted, "Did the board remove you today?" Ryan kept walking without answering. Claire followed several steps behind, suddenly uncomfortable standing beside a man who no longer looked untouchable. By evening, every major business website carried the same headline. Calloway Dynamics confirms leadership transition following ownership review. Financial analysts filled television screens discussing founder rights, trust structures, and corporate governance. Social media moved even faster. Old interviews resurfaced where Ryan repeatedly referred to the company as "my empire." Those words sounded very different now. Meanwhile, Vivian returned to the hospital for one final follow-up appointment before beginning her rehabilitation program. She sat quietly while her cardiologist reviewed the latest test results. Dr. Melissa Grant smiled for the first time since Vivian had been admitted. "Your heart is responding better than I expected." Vivian looked surprised. "Really? Stress can affect recovery more than people realize." The doctor closed the chart. "You still have a long road ahead, but today I finally believe you are walking in the right direction." Vivian smiled gently. "I think I finally believe that too." Across town, Ryan unlocked the door to the penthouse, expecting at least one place to still feel familiar. Instead, he found 2 large suitcases sitting beside the entryway. Claire walked into the living room, carrying the last of her belongings. Ryan frowned. "What is this?" She avoided his eyes while zipping up a garment bag. "I am leaving." He stared at her in disbelief. "Because of one bad day?" Claire slowly shook her head. "No, because I just realized I never really knew the man I chose." Ryan stepped closer. "Claire, this will blow over." She gave him a sad smile. "You said Vivian had nothing left. You said she needed you. Her voice softened. Turns out, you were the one depending on her all along. Ryan had no answer. Claire picked up her suitcase and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused. You know what scares me the most? Ryan looked at her silently. She never tried to destroy you. She simply stopped protecting you. The apartment door closed with a quiet click. For the second time in a single week, Ryan stood alone listening to footsteps disappear. This time there was no meeting to rush to, no celebration waiting, and no one left to convince that he was still in control. The only person he could think about was the woman he had walked away from in a hospital room. And for the first time since that day, he wondered if asking for forgiveness had already become impossible. The words people regret the most are usually the ones they never said when they still had the chance. 3 days passed before Ryan found the courage to drive back to the hospital. The parking garage looked exactly the same as it had the morning he walked away, but nothing inside him felt familiar anymore. He sat behind the steering wheel for several minutes, staring through the windshield while memories replayed one after another. Vivian smiling over takeout containers while they worked late into the night. Vivian waiting outside his office with coffee during their first product launch. Vivian telling him they were building a future together. He covered his face with both hands. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing those memories as gifts and started treating them as expectations. By the time he reached the cardiac recovery wing, his confidence had disappeared completely. He stopped outside Vivian's room and gently knocked on the half-open door. Come in, she answered. Ryan stepped inside. Vivian was sitting beside the window in comfortable clothes instead of a hospital gown. A physical therapy booklet rested on her lap, and a small green plant sat on the windowsill beside her. She looked healthier than the last time he had seen her, though the tiredness around her eyes had not completely faded. She looked up, surprised but calm. Ryan. He nodded awkwardly. Hi. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. For years they had known exactly what to say to each other. Now even simple words felt heavy. Ryan finally spoke. How are you feeling? Vivian smiled politely. Getting stronger. He looked down at the floor. I am glad. She waited. He had not come all this way to talk about the weather. Ryan took a slow breath. I have been trying to figure out where everything went wrong. Vivian looked out the window before answering. I know where it started. He looked at her. Where? The day's success became more important than gratitude. Ryan lowered his eyes. He could not argue with that. He pulled a chair closer and sat down across from her. I came to say I am sorry. Vivian remained quiet. I know that does not fix anything, he continued. I know I cannot erase what I did, but I needed you to hear it from me. She studied his face for a long moment. For the first time in years, there was no pride left in his expression, only exhaustion. Do you remember what I asked you the day you left? She said softly. Ryan nodded almost immediately. You said you were scared. Vivian shook her head gently. After that, his face fell as the memory returned. We will get through it. She smiled sadly. That was the last promise I still believed. Ryan swallowed hard. Vivian. She raised her hand, not to stop him harshly, but because she wanted him to listen instead of defend himself. When I thought I might not survive, I did not need a perfect husband. I did not need flowers or speeches. Her voice trembled slightly before steadying again. I just needed my husband to stay. Ryan closed his eyes. Those 6 words struck harder than every board vote and every news headline combined. I know, he whispered. And I did the one thing you should never do to someone you love. Vivian nodded once. You left. Tears filled Ryan's eyes, but he made no attempt to hide them. If I could go back. Vivian interrupted him gently. You cannot. Another silence followed, softer this time. Vivian reached beside her chair and picked up a small wooden box she had brought from home that morning. She held it in both hands before placing it carefully on the table between them. Ryan looked at it with quiet confusion. What is it? Vivian rested her fingertips on the lid. Something I think finally belongs back with you. Ryan slowly reached toward the box, his hands noticeably trembling, completely unaware that what waited inside would force him to face every choice that had brought them to this moment. The greatest victories are not the ones that leave someone else with nothing. They are the ones that finally allow you to recognize your own worth again. Ryan carefully lifted the lid of the small wooden box. Inside lay 3 simple things. His old silver wedding band, a faded employee identification badge from the first office they had rented above a neighborhood hardware store, and the black fountain pen they had used to sign the company's original incorporation papers almost 9 years earlier. He picked up the pen first, turning it slowly between his fingers. "I thought we lost this," he whispered. Vivian smiled gently. "I kept it because I believed it represented the best part of us." Ryan stared at the worn metal clip, remembering nights when the two of them worked until sunrise with nothing but instant coffee and impossible dreams. Back then they had celebrated every small victory together. There had been no headlines, no luxury apartments, no boardrooms. Just two people believing in each other. He looked at the wedding band resting quietly in the box. "Why are you giving these back to me?" Vivian folded her hands in her lap. "Because I do not need them anymore." Ryan slowly looked up. She continued, "For a long time, I believed those things reminded me of love. Then I realized they were only reminding me of who I used to be before I forgot my own value." Her words were calm, free of bitterness. That somehow made them even harder to hear. Ryan felt his throat tighten. "I never thanked you." Vivian gave a faint smile. "No, you did not. For the company." He paused. "For believing in me when nobody else did." Another pause. "For choosing me." Vivian nodded once. "I know." He looked confused. "You know? You just said it too late." Tears filled Ryan's eyes again, but this time he let them fall. There was nothing left to protect. No image. No title. No audience. Just a man finally meeting the consequences of his own choices. He stood slowly, holding the wooden box against his chest. "I hope someday you find someone who never makes you question your place in his life." Vivian looked at him with quiet kindness. "Ryan, before I find the right person, I needed to become the right person for myself again." He nodded, understanding that some doors close without anger. They simply close because they have reached the end of their story. A month later, the annual leadership meeting at Callaway Dynamics opened with a very different atmosphere. Vivian walked into the headquarters wearing a navy blue suit, carrying the same leather notebook that had once lived on their tiny apartment kitchen table. Employees greeted her with genuine smiles, not because she owned the company, but because they had begun hearing the truth about the woman who had quietly carried it through its hardest years. She accepted the role of executive chair, but surprised everyone by appointing an experienced new chief executive officer instead of taking every title for herself. During her first address to the staff, she stood without dramatic music or polished speeches. "A business grows because of people," she said. "Never confuse the spotlight with the foundation. The strongest foundations are often the ones nobody notices until they are gone." The room answered with heartfelt applause. Across town, Ryan accepted a modest consulting position at a small technology firm. There were no reserved parking spaces, no executive dining room, and no interviews waiting outside the building. For the first time in many years, people judged him only by the work he produced each day. Strangely, that humbled him more than losing his title ever had. Sometimes, during his lunch break, he would take the old fountain pen out of his desk drawer and quietly remember the woman who had believed in him before success changed the way he saw the world. He never asked Vivian for another chance. He understood that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. Some lessons cost far more than money. Some opportunities disappear forever. And sometimes the person you believed would always be there was never asking to be worshipped or rescued. They were simply asking you to stay. If this story leaves anything behind, let it be this. Never measure someone's value by how quietly they stand beside you. The people carrying your dreams may also be carrying your future. And if you only recognize their worth after they walk away, the greatest empire you lose may never be a company at all. It may be the heart that once called you home.